some men at the very top, but also looking very hard at the pay for women and men at the lower levels, where actually the pay has been too low.
But there are serious doubts about this report and its findings from the women who've been campaigning for equal pay.
BBC Women has had to reject this report because we were really hoping to be consulted on its scope and on its methodology. That did not happen, and it's hard to reach any other conclusion other than the conclusion that this report has reached the conclusion the BBC wanted it to reach.
Good evening!
And also the report doesn't cover the BBC's really big earners in entertainment. It's just a survey of news, and one reason for that is news isn't as competitive as it used to be.
Pay rates for the sort of star journalists are way over the top, in my view, in today's market, and I think that's clearly being addressed. The rest of the situation is much more difficult because it's highly subjective who's got the same level of job as somebody else.
The BBC says it wants to be a leader in equality and to reduce the yawning pay divides, but convincing BBC Women that it's truly serious about pay equality, it's still got work to do. David Sillito, BBC News.
Well, our media editor, Amal Rajan, is with me. And the point about the PwC report, Amal, is given the size of the BBC, it's looking at really quite a small number of people within it.
It is. It's the third report the BBC has commissioned on this whole issue of either gender pay or equal pay. But this PwC report, Jane, only looked at 824 presenters, correspondents and editors within BBC News. So it didn't look at the whole of the BBC. And, of course, one of the issues here is that when that list of salaries was published last summer, there's a huge number of names that weren't on there that earn a lot of money from the BBC because they're paid by independent production companies. So we still have far from a full picture about what top earners at the BBC are getting. It's worth saying that Tony Hall's five-point plan, which you mentioned, and which Tony Hall in that clip in David Sillito's package also talked about, I think has conveyed the impression that he is trying to get a grip on this issue. And I think even the BBC Women's campaigning group says that actually Tony Hall has got good intentions and he has taken a control of this issue. But I think they're far from satisfied that actually this is going to address not just current disparities, but historic wrongs. There are a lot of grievances from a lot of people who feel that over years they've accumulated a disadvantage. And so when Carrie Gracie, the former China editor who quit her post as China editor and is returning back to London, quit in protest at unequal pay, she's in front of the Select Committee tomorrow, along with Tony Hall and other senior executives. I think this whole story is going to flare up yet again. And I suspect that far from this report being the end of the story, it's merely the end of the beginning.
Amal, thanks for now. Amal Rajan. The Metropolitan Police and the CPS have apologised to a man accused of rape after a review found that mistakes were made in the disclosure of evidence, which resulted in the trial against him collapsing. 22-year-old Liam Allen had been accused of rape and sexual assault, but his trial was halted after police were ordered to hand over phone records. Our correspondent Danny Shaw is at Scotland Yard. Explain more then what has finally happened here with the police and the CPS, Danny.
Well, Liam Allen was arrested on suspicion of rape in January 2016 and his alleged victim's mobile phone was seized by police. It contained 57,000 lines of data. The officer in charge of the investigation searched through the data looking for relevant material but could find none. It was later found that he hadn't conducted the search properly. He hadn't recorded how he'd conducted the search, and it wasn't until December last year, that's almost 2 years, under which Liam Allen had been under investigation, that relevant, important material was found amongst those messages that undermined the prosecution case and led to the charges against Mr. Allen being dropped. We've had an apology for Liam Allen from the Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, his commander, Richard Smith.
We accept, the Met accepts and the CPS accept that we failed to identify this error early enough, and we really should have done, and that's why I've apologised to Mr. Allen. That's why we've initiated a review of the other cases we have that have got past charge and are running towards trial to ensure that there are no other errors within those that should be addressed.
That review is looking at 600 cases in London. They've already identified 500, and they found some cases which are giving prosecutors cause for concern. As for the detective in the Liam Allen case, he hasn't been disciplined because Scotland Yard says that there was no evidence of misconduct on his part, but he has voluntarily agreed to move to other duties. He will not be investigating sexual assault cases.
Danny Shaw, thank you. Police believe a series of violent burglaries over the last 3 years have been carried out by a man with an armed forces background. Detectives say one man is suspected of carrying out raids in Berkshire, Kent, Sussex and Surrey, in which valuables worth £1 million in total have been stolen. Police say the raids have all had military-style planning. Frankie McHamley reports.
Caught on CCTV, the burglar police believe to have military training or involved in law enforcement. Detectives say in each of the 7 raids he's shown signs of specialist knowledge and skills, staking out his targets for weeks, studying their movements and where they keep their valuables before he makes his vicious move.
He hit me 3 times on my face. It was very, very painful and I couldn't believe the blows kept coming. And so I took him to the jury. I gave him the jury. It was very frightening. But he actually said to me, "Get on the floor." I actually thought he was going to rape me. I was very, very frightened.
The intruder has stolen jewellery, valuables and heirlooms worth in total more than £1 million.
We believe this person is not an amateur burglar. We think that this is somebody who has specialist skills. He uses firearms and cable ties to do this, and he has an immense amount of planning and prepping before he goes and commits these offences.
Despite the Ministry of Defence saying it's working with the police on the investigation, it has asked for more evidence, stating, "We are unable to share DNA taken from personnel before they're deployed on military operations, as it's restricted under data protection. If service personnel are convicted of a crime or are under suspicion, DNA records are shared with the police."
There are trade crafts which we generally will only see by individuals that have specialist or former military experience, which include identifying patterns of life of the owners of these properties, looking at the arcs of the cameras and their locations, to even the methods of entry.
The suspect has targeted affluent homes in Berkshire, Kent, Surrey and Sussex over a period of 3 years. Police say the burglar must now be caught to prevent further harm coming to anybody else. Frankie McHamley, BBC News.
A man accused of murdering one woman and attempting to murder another had years earlier offered an undercover police officer the chance to drug and rape one of his alleged victims, according to evidence heard in court this morning. Mujahid Arshid denies killing Celine Dukran and trying to kill another woman who can't be named for legal reasons. John Donnison is following the case at the Old Bailey. A deeply distressing case. John, explain what was heard in court.
Well, today the prosecution wrapped up their case against Mr. Arshid, and it came in what they call bad character evidence. And as you say, this is an allegation that in 2013, Mr. Arshid was caught up in a police paedophile sting with an undercover officer posing as a paedophile on a website that the police say is used by people with a sexual interest in young people. And the allegation is that Mr. Arshid offered to provide a teenage girl to this undercover officer so that she could be drugged and raped. He also then sent photos to this undercover officer of the woman who now alleges that she was raped and was attempted to be murdered by Mr. Arshid. I should say that Mr. Arshid denies all the charges. He says that someone had managed to access and hack into the router in his home to carry out this chat with the undercover officer, and the Crown Prosecution Service at the time in 2013 decided that there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges. We did actually get onto the defence case today. Mr. Arshid appeared in court and he said that the principal witness against him was a compulsive liar and manipulator. The trial continues.
John Donnison, thank you. The time is 19 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The impact of Britain leaving the EU could see the country substantially worse off, according to a leaked government report. Coming up in the programme, saying farewell to one of football's greats. Fans pay tribute at the funeral of the England and West Bromwich striker Cyril Regis.
Coming up in the sport in the next 15 minutes on BBC News, Arsenal are closing in on Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and that could spark a number of deals before the transfer deadline tomorrow.
Creative arts subjects are being cut back in many secondary schools in England, according to research carried out by the BBC. 9 out of 10 schools which responded to a survey said they had reduced classes, staff or facilities in at least one of these subjects. The findings from more than 1,200 schools suggest music, art and drama and design and technology are all being squeezed. The increased emphasis on core academic subjects and funding pressures were the most common reasons given, as Joe Black reports.
The creative arts, they've been part of the weekly timetable for decades. But for how much longer? In the last few years, head teacher Jez Bennett from Northamptonshire has had to cut arts lessons, resources and staff, and is teaching some of the classes himself.
I've had to make some decisions about whether I can afford to run certain classes, and I know that there are schools that have cut GCSEs in art, music, drama, photography.
I just wanted to be able to have the chance to express myself.
I came to school with no art curriculum. I couldn't see myself enjoying it as much.
Jobs these days mostly rely on your core subjects like maths, English, science, and that is a lot of pressure.
The BBC approached every state school in England asking about their arts provision. 40%, that's more than 1,200 schools, responded. A third said they'd cut the number of lessons in at least one arts subject in the last few years. A quarter said they now employ fewer specialist teachers. And a third are considering dropping at least one arts subject at GCSE. So why is this happening? Schools say the key reason is the government's focus on core academic subjects such as English, maths, the sciences, languages, history and geography. Ministers want schools to ensure more pupils sit these subjects at GCSE. School leaders say pressure on funding is also a major factor.
Then you will bring the chain to her yourself.
No, bear it with you, lest I come not in time.
This Shakespeare Festival gives pupils all over the country the chance to perform on a professional stage. But increasingly, schools have been dropping out because they can't afford it or they don't have enough staff to take part.
You must have the thing out of...
Being a creative member of society means that you are more confident. It means that you communicate better. It means that you work better with people of very, very different backgrounds to yourselves. And those are things that are absolutely crucial structures in a society which faces the kind of difficulties and problems that we face.
The government says schools are required to provide a broad and balanced curriculum which Ofsted consider in their inspections. It also says it's investing £400 million in music and arts education programmes. But for most schools in our survey, cuts to the arts are not over yet, with more expected in the coming years. Joe Black, BBC News.
On the eve of the annual State of the Union address, the man who briefs President Trump on security, the head of the CIA, has warned that China presents as large a security threat to the US as Russia. In an exclusive interview with our security correspondent Gordon Carrera, Mike Pompeo also said that Iran should stop interfering in regional conflicts.
At CIA headquarters, Director Mike Pompeo has a long list of intelligence targets. Allegations of Russian interference in American politics have been high on the agenda, but he told me that he was just as worried by Chinese influence.
We can watch very focused efforts to steal American information, to infiltrate the United States with spies, with people who are going to work on behalf of the Chinese government against America. We see it in our schools, we see it in our hospitals and medical systems. We see it throughout corporate America. It's also true in other parts of the world.
Including Europe and the UK?
Including Europe and the UK, of course.
Another priority, says the CIA director, is confronting Iran in the Middle East and beyond.
Are you worried about the level of Iranian influence in Syria and the region?
Yes.
And are there ways in which you feel you can counter that?
Yes.
You're not worried that particularly the tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia could lead to some kind of conflict?
Very worried about it. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen, and the way to do that is to ensure that the Iranian people understand that this can't be good for them. We saw the protests these past weeks. The Iranian people understand that these adventures which cost the Iranian people tens of millions of dollars and present risk to their lives to fight in Yemen, make no sense. The history of Iran is deep. The Persian people have a deep understanding of how to be successful in the world. I hope that they will rise up and understand that it's not in the best interest of their country to send forces to places like Europe.